My stepmom used my mom's inheritance against me. You didn't deserve it anyway. But then I did the unthinkable. The morning my mother died, the sky was impossibly blue. I remember thinking how cruel that was. How dare the world look so beautiful when everything inside me had turned to ashes? The doctors said it was a stroke, sudden and merciless. One moment she was laughing, frosting cupcakes at Sweet Haven Bakery. The next, she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of vanilla and the echo of her last words. Elena, this place will always be yours. Sweet Haven wasn't just a bakery, it was my mother's masterpiece. She'd built it from nothing after my father left when I was 4, transforming an abandoned corner store into the most beloved bakery in Willowbrook. People came from 3 towns over just to taste her signature lavender honey scones and cinnamon cloud cakes. The recipes were passed down through generations of her family, each one scribbled in her worn leather journal with little notes in the margins. Add more vanilla if it's raining, or the secret is in the 3rd fold, Elena dear. I was 21, halfway through culinary school, when cancer took her. I'd spent my whole life in that bakery, flour dusting my clothes since I could barely reach the countertops. Mom always said, one day, Sweet Haven will be yours to reinvent, while keeping its heart intact. But then there was Clarissa. My stepmother had entered our lives 3 years earlier, sweeping my lonely mother off her feet with compliments and attention. I wanted to be happy for Mom. I really did. But something about Clarissa's too wide smile never quite reached her eyes. Mom couldn't see it. She was too dazzled by finally having someone after years of raising me alone. She makes me feel young again, Elena, Mom would say, her eyes sparkling. So I kept my reservations to myself. What was the point of ruining her happiness over what might have just been my own jealousy? The funeral was a blur of black clothes and casseroles. I stood beside the casket, numb, as a parade of customers turned friends shared stories about how my mother's raspberry tarts had been served at their weddings, or how her chocolate chip cookies had comforted them through divorces and job losses. Sweet Haven wasn't just a place that sold baked goods. It was a sanctuary of sweetness in a bitter world. Clarissa stood beside me the entire time, her arm wrapped around my shoulders like a python. To everyone else, she appeared the picture of grieving support. Poor Elena, she'd murmur to well-wishers. She's taking it so hard. Jessica meant everything to her. What no one could see was how her fingers dug into my shoulder, or how her whispered comforts carried an undercurrent of something that made my skin crawl. I'll handle everything, she kept saying. Don't worry your pretty little head. I should have worried. I should have questioned. But grief is its own kind of blindness. 3 days after we scattered Mom's ashes in her favorite rose garden, Clarissa appeared at my apartment door with a stack of papers and a sympathetic smile. Just some formalities, darling, she said, placing the documents on my kitchen table. Jessica left everything in a bit of a mess, financially speaking. These just confirm you as the beneficiary while I sort through the tax implications. The bakery needs to stay operational during this transition. I stared at the papers, the legal jargon swimming before my exhausted eyes. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Mom died. My apartment was littered with half-empty tea mugs and untouched sympathy cards. Can't this wait? I asked, rubbing my swollen eyes. The bank needs these processed immediately, or they'll freeze the accounts, Clarissa replied, her voice honeyed with concern. You don't want Sweet Haven to close even temporarily, do you? Your mother would be devastated. The mention of disappointing Mom was all it took. With trembling hands, I signed where Clarissa pointed, not bothering to read the fine print through my tears. She gathered the papers quickly, kissed my forehead with lips that felt cold against my skin, and disappeared. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into work at Sweet Haven, finding comfort in the familiar motions of kneading dough and decorating pastries. Customers embraced me, shared memories, left excessive tips. Clarissa handled the business side, as she called it, freeing me to bake and grieve. Until the morning I arrived to find the locks changed. There must be some mistake, I told the locksmith, who awkwardly informed me that he was just following orders from the new owner. New owner? The words felt foreign on my tongue. That's when Clarissa pulled up in her sleek black Mercedes, stepping out in a crisp business suit that had replaced her funeral blacks. "Elena, darling, I was going to call you today. We need to talk." Inside her car, not the bakery, my bakery, she explained with practiced sympathy how I had signed transfer of ownership papers, not beneficiary confirmations. According to the documents, I had willingly relinquished all rights to Sweet Haven Bakery in exchange for a one-time payment of $10,000. "You're young, emotionally unstable right now," she said, patting my hand while I sat frozen in disbelief. "Running a business takes experience, capital, connections, things I have, and you don't. Your mother knew that, deep down." "My mother wanted me to have the bakery," I finally managed to say, my voice barely audible. "It was always the plan." Clarissa's sympathetic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something hard and triumphant underneath. "Plans change, Elena. The bakery needs a steady hand, not a grieving girl playing with flour." She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. "Here's your payment, as agreed. I suggest you use it to finish culinary school." When I didn't take the check, she tucked it into my jacket pocket. "Your mother built something special, and I intend to honor that by making it even more successful. You should be grateful someone competent is taking over." "I'll fight this," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. Those papers were signed under false pretenses. For the first time, Clarissa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Fight with what? What lawyer can you afford? Besides, the documents are perfectly legal." She leaned closer, dropping all pretense of kindness. "You didn't deserve it anyway. Your mother did all the work, built everything from nothing. What have you ever built, Elena? Nothing. You've just been riding on her coattails your entire life." Her words cut deeper than she could know, echoing my own secret fears. Had I taken Mom's legacy for granted? Had I assumed Sweet Haven would simply fall into my lap without earning it? I stumbled from her car in a daze, the check burning in my pocket like a brand. At home, I frantically called the family lawyer, only to discover Clarissa had already spoken with him. The documents were indeed legally binding. I had signed away my birthright for a pittance, blinded by grief and trust. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by the few mementos I had of my mother. Photos, her favorite apron, and one leather-bound recipe book she'd kept at home rather than at the bakery. It contained her oldest, most treasured family recipes, the ones she said were too special for daily customers. As tears dropped onto the aged pages, smudging her handwritten notes, something hardened inside me. Clarissa had taken my mother's bakery, but she hadn't taken my mother's knowledge, passion, or determination, all of which ran in my blood. I picked up the check Clarissa had given me. $10,000. An insulting fraction of what Sweet Haven was worth, but enough, perhaps, for what I now knew I had to do. "I'll get it back, Mom," I whispered to the empty room, clutching the recipe book to my chest. "I promise you, I'll get it all back." Little did Clarissa know, she hadn't just taken my inheritance. She had ignited a fire that would eventually burn down everything she thought she'd won. 6 months after losing Sweet Haven, I found myself standing across the street from what used to be my mother's bakery, barely recognizing it anymore. The quaint, hand-painted sign had been replaced with sleek, corporate lettering. The warm yellow walls were now a fashionable matte gray. Even the window displays, once filled with my mother's imperfectly beautiful creations, now showcased perfectly uniform pastries that looked like they belonged in a magazine. "Sweet Haven, a taste of tradition, reimagined," read the new tagline beneath the logo. Reimagined, as if my mother's vision had been insufficient. I watched through the rain as customers lined up outside, umbrellas dotting the sidewalk like mushrooms after a storm. Business was booming, far more than when Mom was alive. Whatever else I could say about Clarissa, she knew marketing. Social media campaigns featuring secret family recipes passed down through generations had made Sweet Haven the trendiest spot in town. My $10,000 had run out quickly. Legal consultations ate most of it, with every lawyer telling me the same thing: the documents were airtight. I had no case. The rest went to rent and food while I tried to find work. Culinary school was out of the question now. I'd had to drop out when the tuition check bounced. I turned up my collar against the rain and walked away, heading to my shift at Grindhouse Coffee, where I made lattes for hipsters who sometimes mentioned how amazing Sweet Haven's new cinnamon rolls were. That evening, I sat in my tiny studio apartment eating instant ramen. My third time that week, when a commercial flickered on my secondhand TV. "We're expanding," Clarissa's polished voice announced. The camera panned across a gleaming new Sweet Haven location in the upscale Riverside district. Our fourth location opens next week, bringing Jessica's beloved recipes to even more families. Jessica's recipes, my mother's name in her mouth, made me want to throw my bowl at the screen. The camera cut to Clarissa in a pristine white chef's coat, decorating a cake that looked exactly like my mother's signature lavender honey creation. "This was Jessica's special occasion cake," she explained to the interviewer, her hands moving with practiced precision. "She taught me everything about baking before she passed." My chopsticks snapped in my hand. The lie was so blatant, it took my breath away. Mom had barely let Clarissa into the kitchen, let alone taught her anything. Clarissa couldn't tell the difference between baking powder and baking soda. The few times she'd attempted to bake something, Mom and I had exchanged secret glances over the inedible results. "And now, her daughter's carrying on the legacy?" the interviewer asked. A practiced sadness crossed Clarissa's face. Unfortunately, Elena wasn't ready for the responsibility. She chose to pursue other interests with a generous settlement, but she'll always be part of the Sweet Haven family. I hurled my bowl at the wall, noodles sliding down the peeling paint like tears. The next week brought another blow. My former classmate Zoe texted, "OMG, your stepmom was featured in Business Visionaries magazine? Sweet Haven is going national." I blocked her number and spent the night crying into my pillow. By the one-year anniversary of my mother's death, Sweet Haven had 6 locations across 2 states. My Instagram feed, which I masochistically couldn't stop checking, filled with influencers posing with Sweet Haven's pastry boxes, tagged John's Sweet Heaven and Best Bakery Ever. On that anniversary, I visited Mom's grave with a single cupcake I'd baked in my apartment's temperamental oven. "She's using your recipes," I whispered, placing the lopsided cupcake on her headstone. "But they don't taste the same. The lavender honey cake is too sweet now. The scones are too dry. She doesn't understand your notes about adding more vanilla when it rains." A spring breeze rustled the cemetery flowers. "I miss you so much," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "And I failed you. I let her take everything you built." As I sat there, I noticed an older woman placing flowers on a nearby grave. She glanced over, recognition dawning on her face. "You're Jessica's daughter, aren't you, Elena?" I nodded, quickly wiping my tears. "I knew your mother for years. Used to order her raspberry tarts every Sunday." The woman frowned. "I went to Sweet Haven last week. The tarts, they're different now. Too much sugar, not enough heart." Something flickered inside me, a tiny flame where there had been only ashes. "I keep thinking someone should open a bakery that makes them the way your mother did," she continued. "The real way." As she walked away, I stared at my mother's headstone, the tiny flame growing stronger. That night, I pulled out Mom's leather recipe book from under my mattress where I kept it hidden. I hadn't opened it since that terrible day, too afraid the memories would break me completely. This time, I turned the pages with steady hands, running my fingers over her handwriting. The real recipes, the ones Clarissa didn't have, were all here, including secrets Mom had never shared with anyone but me. I took a deep breath and made a decision. Opening my laptop, I created a new document and typed 2 words at the top: Emu beer and crust. The empire Clarissa had built with stolen dreams was about to face something she never expected. The true heir to my mother's legacy, finally ready to reclaim what was mine, not with lawyers but with flour, fire, and the recipes that ran in my blood. $20 short again, I muttered, counting the cash in my tip jar at the end of my Grindhouse coffee shift. 2 years had passed since I'd lost Sweet Haven, and my plan for Ember and Crust remained just that. A plan scribbled in notebooks, a dream that seemed increasingly impossible with each passing month. Until the morning Marco Rodriguez walked into the coffee shop. "The usual?" I asked, already reaching for the large dark roast he ordered every Tuesday. Marco, a successful food truck operator known for his gourmet tacos, studied me with curious eyes. "You're Jessica Harper's daughter, aren't you? From Sweet Haven?" I froze. "Was. Sweet Haven isn't ours anymore." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I noticed, the new management, the pastries don't have the same soul." He leaned forward. "I've been looking for a baker to partner with. Someone who understands that food isn't just about taste, it's about memory and connection." That conversation changed everything. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing beside Marco's newly purchased second food truck, freshly painted in warm oranges and deep reds. The words "Ember and Crust" emblazoned on the side in my mother's favorite font. "This is really happening," I whispered, running my fingers over the letters. Marco grinned, handing me the keys. "Your truck, your rules. I'm just the investor. 60-40 split until you pay me back, then it's all yours." The first morning was terrifying. I'd stayed up all night baking in Marco's commercial kitchen, following my mother's recipes with religious precision. Dawn found me arranging pastries in the tiny food truck display case, hands trembling with exhaustion and nerves. "What if no one comes?" I asked Marco, who'd stopped by to wish me luck. "They'll come," he said simply. "Good food always finds its audience." He was right. By noon, word had spread about the new pastry truck at the farmer's market. By closing time, I'd sold out completely. A young woman clutching the last lavender honey scone closed her eyes as she took a bite. "This tastes like memory," she said. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" I thought of my mother, flour dusting her cheeks as she guided my small hands through the process of folding dough. "Family tradition," I replied. Week by week, Ember and Crust built a following. I started an Instagram account. Nothing fancy, just honest photos of my baking process, sometimes showing my mistakes alongside the successes. It was the opposite of Sweet Haven's polished corporate feed, and people responded to the authenticity. 6 months in, a food blogger found me. "There's something magical about these pastries," she wrote in her popular blog. "They taste like they're made by someone who understands that baking is an act of love." In a world of mass-produced sweetness, Ember and Crust feels like coming home. The post went viral in our local foodie community. Lines formed at the truck wherever I parked it. I hired my first employee, Zach, a culinary student with quick hands and a quicker smile. "I've had a Sweet Haven cinnamon roll," he told me after his first week. "Yours are better. Theirs look perfect but taste manufactured. Yours look rustic but taste authentic." That word, authentic, became our unofficial motto. A year into my food truck adventure, a small storefront became available near the University District. The rent was steep, but with Marco's encouragement and the small savings I'd managed to accumulate, I signed the lease. Ember and Crust's cafe opened with little fanfare, just a handwritten sign and the same honest food philosophy. But the customers followed, bringing friends, family, and coworkers. I kept the decor minimal but warm. Exposed brick walls, reclaimed wood tables, and copper accents that glowed in the soft lighting. On one wall, I hung a small portrait of my mother that a customer and art student had painted for me in exchange for a month of free pastries. Unlike Clarissa's systematic expansion of Sweet Haven, my growth was organic and intimate. I knew my regular customers by name. I adjusted recipes based on their feedback. When Lisa mentioned her son's dairy allergy, I developed a non-dairy version of Mom's cloud cake that became a permanent menu item. The real turning point came when Regional Eats magazine included Ember and Crust in their Hidden Gems feature. The photographer captured me in mid-laugh, dusted with flour, hair escaping my bandana, so different from Clarissa's polished portraits in her pristine chef's whites. "Some bakeries are built on business plans," the article read. Ember and Crust was built on heritage and heart. The day the magazine hit newsstands, I received an email that made my heart stop. "Dear Miss Harper, we represent a small group of independent investors interested in supporting authentic local businesses with expansion potential. Your story and your approach to baking have caught our attention. We would be interested in discussing opportunities for Ember and Crust to open a second location, with you maintaining creative control. Sincerely, Phoenix Ventures." I read the email 5 times, barely able to breathe. This was it, the chance to take Ember and Crust to the next level. to truly begin competing with Sweet Haven. That night, as I locked up the cafe, I noticed a sleek black Mercedes idling across the street. Through the tinted window, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face watching me. Clarissa had finally noticed me. I smiled to myself, pocketing my keys. The real battle was about to begin. The meeting with Phoenix Ventures changed everything. Seated across from three sharp-eyed investors in a downtown office, presented my vision for Ember and Crust's expansion. "We don't want to be another soulless chain," I explained, pushing my mother's worn recipe book across the table. "Every location will have this, the original recipes, the real techniques. Our bakers will be trained personally by me." Daphne Chen, the lead investor, flipped through the pages reverently. "This is your edge, Elena. Sweet Haven sells the illusion of homemade. You offer the real thing." With their backing, I secured a location that made my intentions crystal clear, directly across the street from Sweet Haven's flagship store, the original bakery my mother had built from nothing. The day before our opening, I stood in Ember and Crust's gleaming new kitchen, breathing in the familiar scents of vanilla and rising dough. The space was 3 times larger than my first cafe, with copper-accented fixtures and exposed brick that matched our brand aesthetic. Through the front windows, I could see Sweet Haven's gray and blue facade, its clinical perfection a stark contrast to our warm, imperfect charm. "You sure about this location?" Marco asked, arranging copper mixing bowls on an open shelf. "It's pretty in your face." I smiled, feeling a confidence I hadn't known in years. It's time Clarissa remembered who my mother really was and who I am. The grand opening drew crowds that wrapped around the block. I'd sent press releases to every food blogger and local YouTuber, not mentioning Sweet Haven by name, but emphasizing phrases like authentic family recipes and the way they were meant to be made. Midway through the morning rush, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Clarissa stood in my doorway, immaculate in designer clothes, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. Our eyes locked across the bustling cafe. She walked slowly toward the counter, studying everything: the handwritten menu, the deliberately mismatched vintage plates, the wall of customer Polaroids already forming. "Clever," she said when she reached me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Using Jessica's name to sell mediocre pastries." "I don't need to use her name," I replied calmly. "I have her talent." Her perfect smile tightened. "This little venture of yours is cute, but don't think for a second you can compete with Sweet Haven. We're opening our 15th location next month." "You're a footnote, Elena, a curiosity." I leaned forward. "Try the lavender honey scone. Tell me if it tastes familiar." Her eyes narrowed as she realized I had the recipes she didn't, the ones Mom had kept at home, safe from Clarissa's grasp. "This isn't over," she hissed, turning to leave. I smiled. It's only just begun. This escalated quickly. Sweet Haven launched a heritage menu featuring poor imitations of my mother's special recipes. I countered with original classics, unchanged since 1995, and dropped my prices just enough to hurt them without harming myself. Then came the social media attacks. Anonymous reviews claiming they'd found hair in Ember and Crust pastries. Posts suggesting our ingredients weren't fresh. Each one traced back to IP addresses suspiciously close to Sweet Haven's corporate office. I responded not with similar tactics, but with transparency. I installed a glass wall between our kitchen and the cafe, letting customers watch the baking process. I posted daily behind-the-scenes videos showing our ingredients being delivered from local farms. 3 months into our rivalry, Sweet Haven's flagship location, my mother's original bakery, saw its first ever decline in quarterly sales. Meanwhile, Phoenix Ventures approached me about a 3rd location. That's when Clarissa went nuclear. Sweet Haven files lawsuit against Ember and Crust for recipe theft. Read the headline in the business section of the local paper. The article quoted Clarissa claiming I had stolen proprietary recipes during my brief employment and was trading on Sweet Haven's established reputation. I was serving customers when Ryan Blake, a sharp-eyed lawyer Phoenix Ventures had connected me with, walked in and placed the newspaper on the counter. "You need me," he said simply. 2 hours later, in his office lined with law books, I learned the gravity of my situation. "She's claiming the recipes in your mother's personal cookbook were actually developed during your employment at Sweet Haven. making them their intellectual property, he explained. It's nonsense, but fighting this will be expensive. I clutched my mother's recipe book. The spine cracked from years of use. These recipes predate Sweet Haven. Some go back to my great-grandmother. Ryan nodded. Then we countersue. Not just for the recipes, for everything. Everything? His eyes gleamed. Elena, how exactly did you come to sign away your inheritance? Were you in a sound mental state? Were you informed of what you were signing? Was there a witness present who wasn't Clarissa? For the first time, I saw a path forward that wasn't just about competing with Sweet Haven. It was about reclaiming it. That evening, as I closed the cafe, a familiar figure waited outside. Marjorie, who had been my mother's assistant manager for a decade before Clarissa fired her. I heard about the lawsuit, she said, hugging me tightly. I've been waiting for this day. There's something you should know. I was there the day your mother revised her will, and I know exactly what it said before Clarissa got involved. As she spoke, pieces fell into place. The documents I'd signed, the convenient timing, the speed with which Clarissa had moved. I called Ryan immediately. I think we have our smoking gun. Across the street, the lights of Sweet Haven's flagship store went dark for the night. Soon, I thought, they might go dark permanently. Or better yet, shine again under new ownership. The real owner, me. The county courthouse stood imposing against the gray October sky, its stone columns a stark reminder of the weight of law. For months, my life had been consumed by depositions, evidence gathering, and late-night strategy sessions with Ryan and his team. Ready? Ryan asked as we climbed the steps. My mother's leather recipe book clutched to chest like a shield. I nodded, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Inside my bag was a USB drive containing what Marjorie had called insurance, my mother's hidden voice recordings. The courtroom fell silent as Clarissa entered with her legal team, 3 suited attorneys from a prestigious firm. She wore a conservative navy dress, her hair pulled back in a modest bun, the picture of a respectable businesswoman wronged. When our eyes met, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Harmon entered, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and piercing eyes. Clarissa's lead attorney, Maxwell Warren, presented their case first, a masterclass in selective truth-telling. He painted Sweet Haven as a struggling bakery that Clarissa had saved from near bankruptcy after my mother's death, transforming it into a thriving enterprise through proprietary recipes and techniques developed under Sweet Haven's roof. Miss Harper abandoned the business, accepting a generous settlement, Warren asserted, gesturing toward me. Now that Sweet Haven has become successful, she's attempting to profit from Mrs. Williams' hard work by stealing recipes and trading on Sweet Haven's reputation. When Ryan rose for our opening statement, his approach was unexpectedly simple. Your Honor, this case isn't about recipes or competition, he began. It's about fraud, manipulation, and taking advantage of a grieving daughter. We intend to prove that Elena Harper never willingly signed away her inheritance, but was deliberately misled during a period of extreme emotional distress. Over the next 3 days, witnesses took the stand. Sweet Haven's corporate accountant testified about the bakery's financial health. Former employees spoke about recipe development. A succession of experts argued about the originality of certain pastries. Then, Marjorie took the stand. Miss Downing, what was your position at Sweet Haven Bakery? Ryan asked. Assistant manager for 12 years, until Mrs. Williams terminated my employment 2 weeks after taking ownership. And why were you terminated? Marjorie's eyes found Clarissa's. I questioned the paperwork. I told her I knew Jessica Harper had left the bakery to Elena, not her. The courtroom stirred. Clarissa's attorney objected, claiming hearsay, but Judge Harmon allowed Marjorie to continue. Jessica showed me her will 3 months before she passed. She was explicit that Sweet Haven would go to Elena. Everything would go to Elena, with a modest stipend for Clarissa. Warren rose for cross-examination. Did you actually see this alleged will? Yes, Marjorie replied calmly. Jessica asked me to witness it. Yet no such will has been presented in evidence. Convenient, isn't it? Marjorie remained unruffled. The will disappeared after Jessica's death, but the notary who witnessed it hasn't disappeared. That afternoon, Notary Public Thomas Griffith testified that he had indeed notarized Jessica Harper's will, leaving everything to me. He also confirmed that the document Clarissa later presented, the one leaving her the bakery, had not been notarized by him, despite bearing what appeared to be his stamp. "That's not my signature," he stated firmly, comparing the documents, "and I would never notarize a will without the testator present." Mrs. Harper was not present when the signature was supposedly obtained. The momentum shifted perceptibly in our favor, but Ryan saved our strongest evidence for Clarissa's testimony. On the stand, Clarissa maintained her composure, portraying herself as a grieving widow who had only wanted to preserve her late wife's legacy. Elena was in no condition to run a business, she insisted. She agreed to the arrangement. "Ask anyone," she signed the papers willingly. "Let's talk about those papers," Ryan said, approaching the stand. "You testified that you clearly explained to Elena that she was signing over ownership of Sweet Haven, correct?" "Of course. Everything was transparent." Ryan played a recording, my tearful voice asking if the documents were just beneficiary confirmations, followed by Clarissa's soothing assurance that they were just formalities while she sorted through tax implications. Clarissa paled. "Where did you get that?" Jessica Harper recorded all important conversations on her phone, a habit from her days managing staff. She was recording the day you discussed changing her will, too. The courtroom fell silent as my mother's voice filled the air, weak from illness but resolute. "I want to be absolutely clear, Clarissa. Sweet Haven goes to Elena. Everything goes to Elena." Clarissa's voice responded, "Of course, darling. Elena will have everything that's yours." The recording continued, damning in its clarity, as Clarissa promised to take care of all the paperwork while my mother was in the hospital. When the recording ended, Ryan turned to Clarissa, whose perfect composure had finally cracked. "You never intended to honor Jessica's wishes, did you?" "Objection," Warren called desperately. But it was too late. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. After a brief recess, Judge Harmon returned with her ruling. The court finds clear evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation and undue influence exerted upon the plaintiff during a period of documented emotional distress. She looked directly at me. "The ownership transfer is hereby invalidated. All assets of Sweet Haven Bakery, including all locations, trademarks, and intellectual property, are returned to Elena Harper as the rightful heir." The gavel struck with finality. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Clarissa pushed through the crowd, ignoring questions. She paused only when I called her name. "You know what the worst part is?" I said quietly. "My mother actually loved you." Something flickered behind her eyes, regret, perhaps, or just the recognition of defeat. Without a word, she turned and walked away. Heels clicking on pavement, shoulders rigid with pride even in disgrace. As camera flashes popped around us, Ryan squeezed my shoulder. "So, what happens to Sweet Haven now?" I watched Clarissa's retreating figure, thinking of all she had built with my mother's legacy: 15 locations, a recognizable brand, a customer base spanning 3 states. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time for Sweet Haven, Amber, and Crust to become one." 6 months after the court ruling, I stood in the original Sweet Haven Bakery, my mother's first location, watching contractors remove the sleek corporate signage. Tomorrow, the new sign would go up: "The Haven by Elena." The rebranding had taken months of careful planning. 15 Sweet Haven locations were now transitioning to my vision. Not Ember and Crust, not the old Sweet Haven, but something new that honored both journeys. "Miss Harper, where do you want these?" A worker held up the vintage copper mixing bowls that had become Ember and Crust's signature decorative element. "Display case behind the counter," I replied. "And please, call me Elena." The merger hadn't been simple. Sweet Haven's corporate staff viewed me with suspicion at first. Ember and Crust's loyal customers worried I'd sell out. But I'd navigated the challenge with a clear vision: take the best of both worlds. From Sweet Haven, I kept the efficient operation systems Clarissa had implemented. Her business acumen had been real, even if her ethics weren't. From Ember and Crust, I brought the authenticity, the connection to customers, the imperfect beauty of handcrafted goods. The first shipment of new packaging just arrived, called Zach, now my head of operations. He held up a box in warm copper tones. "The Haven by Elena," embossed in my mother's favorite font. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Est, 1995, reimagined. "Perfect," I said, running my fingers over the embossing. Mom would have loved these. The bell above the door jingled as Marco entered, carrying a large framed photograph. Special delivery, he announced, setting it carefully on the counter. It was a professional restoration of an old photograph, my mother at 19, standing proudly in her culinary school uniform, flour dusting her cheeks, her smile radiant with dreams not yet realized. For the wall of honor, Marco said, gesturing to the brick wall we'd exposed during renovations. The wall would feature photographs of all the people who had made this journey possible. My mother, Marco, Marjorie, even some of the original Sweet Haven employees who had returned after hearing about the lawsuit's outcome. Clarissa's absence from the wall was conspicuous, but necessary. After the court ruling, she had disappeared from public view. Rumors placed her in Miami, starting over with the settlement money I'd agreed to pay her. A fraction of what Sweet Haven was worth, but enough for a new beginning. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to leave her with nothing. My mother had loved her once, after all. As evening fell, the workers left, and I sat alone in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the ghosts of what had been and the promise of what would be. Tomorrow's grand reopening would be covered by local news and national food blogs. My story had captured people's imagination, the underdog reclaiming her birthright, the daughter honoring her mother's legacy. But tonight was just for me. I moved to the kitchen, my hands finding the familiar rhythm as I mixed my mother's signature lavender honey dough. Some recipes would remain exclusive to the Haven. Others would be published in the cookbook I was writing. Jessica's Legacy, the Heart of Sweet Haven. As the scent of baking filled the air, I thought about the path that had led me here. The grief, the betrayal, the struggle, the triumph. I'd lost everything, only to gain more than I'd ever imagined. When the scones were golden, I placed one on a plate and walked the short distance to the small garden behind the bakery. My mother's favorite spot where she'd often sat during breaks. In the corner stood a small memorial plaque we'd installed, nestled among her beloved lavender plants. "We did it, Mom," I whispered, setting the scone beside the plaque. I brought it all home. The morning of the grand reopening, I arrived at dawn to find a line already forming around the block. Newsrews set up cameras as I unlocked the doors, the new copper keys heavy with significance in my palm. Marjorie appeared at my side, now restored to her position as assistant manager. "Ready?" I nodded, thinking of how far we'd come. The Haven would donate a percentage of profits to a foundation I'd established in my mother's name, the Jessica Harper Fund for Young Entrepreneurs, specifically helping young women without resources to start their own businesses. As I cut the ribbon across the doorway, cameras flashing, I couldn't help but think of Clarissa's words from that terrible day years ago. "What have you ever built, Elena?" Now I had my answer. I had built justice from injustice. Strength from weakness, a future from a stolen past. The first customer through the door was the older woman from the cemetery, the one who had told me my mother's raspberry tarts weren't the same anymore. "Welcome to the Haven," I said, taking her hand. She smiled, looking around at the transformed space that somehow felt more like my mother's bakery than it had in years. "It feels like coming home," she said. And as sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the copper fixtures and the wall of photographs that told our story, I knew she was right. After all the detours and struggles, I had finally come home and brought my mother's legacy with me.